Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're discussing national political news of the day, and we're going to start with what I consider to be some rare good news in an avalanche of bad news. But President Biden, on his way out, has been issuing orders that may have some permanent or long-term positive effect. And one of them is a ban on virtually all of the coastline of North America, of the lower 48. It's pretty much everything except for the western part of the Gulf of Mexico, although it may be the Gulf of America at a certain point. But not only that, but around Pacific Islands, around a good portion of Alaska and Puerto Rico. And there's a little bit of a history here, because after the famous Santa Barbara oil spill of 1969, which was just absolutely disastrous to the ecosystem of that channel, it basically turned beaches black and turned the rest of the country green, at least for a while. 1982, they passed some protection that extends up California to about San Francisco, maybe a little bit higher, I'm not sure. But they deliberately left out Mendocino, Humboldt County, Del Norte, basically Point Arena to the Oregon border, despite a lot of environmentalists pushing for it, because there is a lot of oil out there, apparently. I mean, we know that there's oil locally here in the town, what's referred to as Petrolia, and there is more out in the ocean, a lot to be had. And in 1982, the Congress passed it without the protection, without that area. Then in 1988, California tried to pass its own protection, the legislature extending up to the border, but then Republican Governor George Deukmejian vetoed it, and it led to a lot of local angst about whether or not there were going to be oil rigs out on our from our ocean, which could really have negatively impacted tourism, and not to mention the local ecosystem. And there was a campaign, and even businesses owned by conservatives had these little stickers on them that were oil rigs with a universal red circle and slash symbol, which means no oil rigs. And you can still see them on a few businesses here and there. A couple of them in Mendocino faded, but because you never know when it's going to be necessary. Well, the President Biden made an order that permanently protects almost all of this land from offshore oil drilling, with the intention that eventually we're going to move away from oil, or at least extreme dependence on oil. And I'm going to toss it in just a minute, but I want to point out that everybody thinks, well, Trump will just reverse it. You can't. He can't necessarily do that. He tried when Obama made an order protecting some part of Alaska. District Court ruled against Trump, and it was in the appellate court when Biden came to office, and he dismissed the appeal. So we'll see what happens with it. But the order is made under what's called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, passed in the 1950s. And it delegates a congressional authority of lawmaking to the president. So once he issues this order, not only can a subsequent president not undo it, but he can't even undo it. He doesn't have the power to undo it if he was to change his mind tomorrow while he's still in office. So Trump thinks he can get it done through an act of Congress, but I'm not so sure that all of the people in swing districts are going to want to undo this, or whether it can get by a filibuster, and do the Republicans want to kill the filibuster. A lot more to say about this, but I want to turn it over to you, Dave.
Well, thank you, as always, for that setup. I think you hit on all the key parts to this. 625 million acres, which is the majority of the Atlantic Pacific coast. As you mentioned, the Gulf, Alaska, some other places. So I think this is interesting for a couple technical reasons, and then maybe we'll talk about the political reasons afterwards. So firstly, what the law empowers the president to do is set aside areas that are no longer eligible for leases for oil and gas. So people are talking about it like it's a drilling ban, but in fact, there's a lot of leases in place already. The United States is already producing more oil and gas than any other country in the world combined. Like there are some emirates that have more gas, but when you combine our energy output, we're already doing pretty. We're a powerhouse in the energy sector, and we are exporting a tremendous amount. So there's also some rhetoric out there about energy independence, as if all of our energy that we are producing stays home, but it doesn't. There's an awful lot of exporting happening also.
And I just want to point out that under Joe Biden, there's more drilling than has happened under any other presidency. There's a misperception that it's actually declined under him. And the trajectory may be different, but anyway, the fact is we're drilling more. And yes, the existing leases will not be nullified. They may not be renewed, but we'll see.
And so I think that one of the things you said, I just want to kind of expound upon that. The original law is it's called Section 12A of this law. You could set aside land to exclude from permitting leases, but there's no power in there to then rescind that exclusion. Right. So I think that it sounds like inside baseball, but I think there's going to be a lot of talk in the very near future about potentially undoing that. And so that includes Congress, right? Because it's a law passed by Congress. So there is going to be a budget reconciliation process that happens, and people are saying that it could be the opportunity for Congress to input additional language into that section that would make it easier for Trump to, when he takes office, to then just with the stroke of a pen do an executive order. But barring that sort of congressional technique, what we would see is litigation, right? So they would be tied up in the courts for a while. And a judge has already found that the law does not actually have the power to, that the president doesn't have the power to rescind the order. But it was going to go to the courts again, as you mentioned, during the Trump administration. He ran out of time. So it will definitely end up back in the courts. I think that, like I said, from a technical legal perspective, this Supreme Court could be perceived to be Trump friendly, and they could, in theory, say, well, if the president has the power to, do this, then he could do that. Like the court could just as easily intervene. I'm not as 100% optimistic as you are that the permanent nature of Biden's ban is permanent. That's the technical piece of this. I think politically, just
real quickly,
I
want to point out what the Democrats and what the environmental groups did last time around was to mark time to run out the clock to get to the point where Biden could dismiss that appeal. And so and they may do that. It may not get to the Supreme Court. That's the thing. So.
Yeah, truth. And so because it was Alaska that was in play, it was in the Ninth Circuit. So you could expect that they would be environmentalist friendly all the way through till it gets to the Supreme Court. But the other thing I was going to mention about this is that the specifics of the politics, right? So when Trump was in office, he actually protected the waters off of Georgia, Florida, North and South Carolina, and Virginia to insulate the GOP political community from criticism, because the community, the residents of those states wanted their coastlines protected already. So there is a demand side public will to protect these places. Even I'm actually in Florida right now, and so much of the money for Florida comes from tourism, and the waters are what need to be protected here, and the citizens know it. And even though it's a red state, they are extremely interested in protecting the coast. So it's one of those things where Trump's bluster, in favor of the energy sector is what's really playing out right now in the media. But we'll see if there's the political will in Congress to fast track some change on his behalf.
Yeah, I mean, it's real close, and so they can't have any Republican defections. I don't think they'll even get many Democratic defections. They've already signaled they don't want to be the ones who end up, especially all of the close people in Southern California. Those spills in Santa Barbara are not ancient history. They still have impacts from them. Exxon Valdez killed over 1 million birds, right? I mean, more than the entire wind industry does in like 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's just it is a bit of that. And again, even up here in Humboldt County, even conservatives did not want that to happen here. They don't mind it happening somewhere else, but they don't want it to happen here because that would impact their businesses. Humboldt County being very much a tourist industry, a tourist area, and Mendocino, the town of Mendocino. I mean, their whole the appeal is the beauty. But not only that, we've got fishing industries that are dependent on this. I mean, that spill in the channel, because there wasn't open sea to flush it out so easily, that really had an impact for years. I mean, that's why we have the Clean Water Act. That's that and Love Canal, and so it's so it just would take a few Republicans to say, "Nah, I don't want to go down with that ship," to nix that. And then if they try to do it through a budget reconciliation, they run the risk of I'm forgetting what the name of the person they've appointed in the Senate to do the analysis, to say, no, it doesn't apply. And so then do they want to kill the filibuster for that, or temporarily do that? Well, that's setting a real bad precedent. I mean, they can't assume that they're going to be in power forever. Again, if the forces that want to maintain these protections are successful, they're going to drag out the time. The 9th District isn't what it used to be. It's not as liberal. There have been a lot of Bush and Trump appointees in there, but it knows where its butter is bred. It was a district court in Alaska. Those aren't conservatives up there. They have to choose from. I mean, liberals up there. They have to choose from that pool, and it's what the law says. There's nothing to stop them, to empower them from it. So that's the question. And so the Supreme Court, there's at least 2 of them there that worry about the precedent of what they do. And if this executive order for this particular delegated power can be revoked by the next president, then what does that say about any orders? Anything Trump orders? Right. So it's just I think Biden played this one well. In 2 years there'll be congressional people saying, well, we need that oil. Do we? We're the #1 oil producer right now. Do we really need that oil? Why do we need it? I mean, it's just but it interferes with Trump's drill baby drill, and he's taking it personally, like it wasn't about the environment or anything. It was just to get him personally, because everything is always about him. But I don't know. It's possible they could do that if Trump can whip Congress in line and fast track it, as you say, and put it into something that they can push and bypass somehow the Senate filibuster. But it's going to be difficult for them to do that, and they may not like the impact of the precedent. But on the other hand, Republicans these days don't think very far ahead about the impacts of their precedents. They just do it because they can. So
I would add that I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but just for the purpose of devil's advocate, you mentioned drill baby drill, right? So I think that all that talk about the energy industry is really the energy industry just trying to have their way and not necessarily needing every fight that they engage in. So, for example, the president of the American and CEO, his name is Mike Summers of the American Petroleum Institute, they already gave Trump a list of their top 5 things that they're interested in having done when he takes office. He said this is something that's going to be on his list on day 1. But just for context, what would be the benefit to the American people So around 14% of all of our current oil and gas comes from these spaces that were now protected. It's a pretty big number. That's 12.5% would be one in eight. So it's not a small change. But then also how much money accrues to the American people versus the oil industry. And this is obviously the rosy scenario coming from this body. But they said about $8 billion in new leases could be expected from these places if these restrictions weren't in place. We have, depending on the year, a budget deficit in the area of a couple $1 trillion. We need all the money we can get, but $8 billion isn't really a whole heck of a lot in the grand scheme of things. So if people would prioritize a transition to, say, more green energy, some new generation nuclear, maybe we don't need to keep expanding petroleum.
Okay, so this brings us to the topic of a revival of imperial America. There seems to be a transition from America first to America expand. Trump has basically said that he wants to be the first president in over half a century or whatever to actually expand American territory, and he's got three places he's looking at. Canada, of all places. I mean, we already call it the 51st state. Panama and Greenland, and he has refused to exclude the use of force to obtain the Panama Canal and Greenland. He says Greenland is important for our strategic defense or whatever. And he sent Don Jr. there. It was kind of a fiasco, and we can get into that. But it's but he wants Greenland, and he says he does not recognize Denmark's current right to it. It's actually for quite a few decades been acting sort of independently, still officially part of Denmark. They're probably grateful right now that they're still part of Denmark because, as has been pointed out by a number of people in the media recently, some of it is that if we use force to retake Greenland, that is attack on Denmark. Denmark is a NATO country. The rest of NATO is obliged by treaty to declare war on us. In fact, we would be obliged to declare war on us. That's, we're signatories to the treaty. So for him to talk this way, and of course, everybody thinks, well, it's his, stable genius. He's just creating chaos to distract from other things. Maybe, but I think he really does want to be able to go down to his legacy of we expanded America for greater America to gain some territory on some kind of manifest destiny. This is much different from the isolationism that he had been pushing, the America First, which was reminiscent of the 1930s when Republicans and conservatives were also opposed to involvement in what would become World War II, the Anschluss and the rest, and partly because some of it was, at least early on, sympathetic to Hitler. For instance, Henry Ford was, and to fascist ideals. So this was the conservatism of the moment at that point, and it was hard to get involved in the war, even to the point where we had to be attacked in Hawaii for that to happen. So so that might be gone. I'll be curious to see if that adds to the civil war that's going on within, between the oligarchs and the nativists within the MAGA movement right now. But but it's something that it really is irresponsible of him to even talk about, even if he doesn't mean it. You don't say something like that. You're about to be president, and you don't get to say things like that just because you're Donald Trump. And maybe people in this country put up with it, but people in the other countries aren't going to. And there will be consequences if he keeps talking this way. And it's really bad. It really makes us look bad. The ugly American again. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think you introduced this and presented the facts well. David Sanger, I think it was, from the New York Times, who's the person who asked Trump in that press conference, would you basically say you would not use military and economic coercion in these countries that you've talked about with you so far, Greenland? We'll pivot to Panama later. But he said, no, I can't make that promise. He said, we need this place for our our national security. Yeah. And the truth is we don't, right? Because Greenland it's a part of Denmark. It's a NATO ally. Anything militarily we needed in that area, we could have. If we wanted to be involved in development of key, natural resources like oil and gas, we could be. And also, they have a high volume, supposedly, with climate change. We'll have access to rare earth minerals there, which are really important in conversion to electric car batteries and potentially other batteries for storage of green energy sources that occur during the daytime that we'd need to use at night. That's how it works. That's how global trade works. You don't need to coerce your neighbors and allies into a good deal when it's a mutually beneficial economic exchange. So that America first, doctrine is somehow now America first imperialism. I think it's off brand. We don't need to be here. Not even getting into the question of what does this mean for our international relations with allies and adversaries, just strictly from a U.S. economic national interest perspective. But if you look at it from Greenland's perspective, they did have a referendum, and 75% of the population said they wanted to be independent from Denmark.
So do they want another ruler?
Right. That's right. They want independence. They wanted, and their own prime minister said they want to throw off the shackles of the colonial era. So that's the zeitgeist going on there. It's only, not to make light of it, but it's a small population, 45,000 people. I just don't see it as a critical issue. And just to kind of pivot, I don't know if there's more you'd like to say about Greenland, but it's the same kind of thing for Panama, right? It's not necessary for, I would argue, the context is what Trump said is that the United States funded and developed the Panama Canal for, he said, military purposes, but it's more than that, right? It's all trade across the Pacific Atlantic regions. It's a hugely important body of water, transit point. And Trump said that the United States gave back Panama Canal to Panama and that it was Carter's big mistake. Well, again, it's about their own sovereignty over their own territory. There's a dynamic happening in the canal zone it uses fresh rainwater from a lake to move these locks up and down. And there's not, with climate change, there's a real potential for it to no longer be as productive of a channel as it's been. So there's actually already construction work being done on an alternative route. So there's an economic the market is speaking by saying, hey, our tanker ships are huge. We need another channel anyway. There's already another channel in the works, canal. So this is really just a way, I think, for Trump to try to get a good, maybe some fair rates for American shipping industry or other, global allies shipping. Maybe Panama, like it's a negotiating chip. I just feel like the truth is that it's just not something that is necessary. Again, like the Greenland conversation.
No, because the voters in Panama aren't going to like the fact that they're trying that he's trying to push them around, and they're going to press to push back. which could actually make such agreements less likely. I mean, this is just, this is not, this is the problem with business people holding office. They are used to getting what they want. A business is essentially a dictatorship. Whoever's in charge, whoever owns it, makes all the decisions, and nobody gets to question them unless they've broken the law or something, right? So this is how they're used to operating. This is how Musk is used to operating. I mean, there's a lot of claims that he's the real president, right? The puppet master, and the rest, and that's why people are saying he won't let that happen. It's just but this is, and yes, there's talks about this. There's also talks about a canal going through Mexico, and there's been talks for decades of going through Nicaragua. So it's and none of them are going to happen right away, but it's just but definitely it is there is an international strategic interest in that, and if Panama is not having the money, doesn't have the money itself to really provide the necessary upgrades and infrastructure and all of that, then it's probably in the international community's interest to provide some loans, at least, if not grants, right? I mean, but to say that he wants to take it over, this is playing into the politics. It was always, considered Carter part of his weakness, that he gave it up. He gave it up because we were of the original agreement. We were obliged to. That was, honoring the actual the agreement that allowed the canal to be built in the first place. And so but that just doesn't. That doesn't resonate with everybody. Everybody says, "Hey, we built it; it's ours, and we can do what we want," and that's what they want. Especially people who support Trump want that, even though they say they don't want international involvement. Apparently, well, I don't know if they're going along with it. We'll see. I mean, we'll find out. But it's and then, the thing with Canada, of course, people are saying, oh, Justin Trudeau resigned because he doesn't want to face Trump, which is ridiculous. Justin Trudeau resigned so that they'll have a chance, the Liberal Party will have a chance of holding on to power in the coming election. But even the Conservative Party, people there aren't saying we're going to become the 51st state. Even conservatives don't want to have our healthcare system, for crying out loud, or at least they don't say they do. So that's not going to happen. But he's talking this way. He wants that to be part of his legacy. So I don't know. Maybe some country will find some island somewhere that they can just give to him, so that he can, claim that he expanded America or something, because he wants that to be part of his legacy. It's very similar to Putin's legacy. He wants to restore Greater Russia, right? He wants to show that there's been an expansion rather than a contraction. That's how certain elements of politics define the strength, and so he's caught up in that, but man, is he again, he seemed to get along with dictators and not get along with democracies, and this is not going to ingratiate him with democratic leaders.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a bigger, you've tapped into, or you've pointed to the bigger issue, where part of Trump's popularity, I would argue, was that he said, hey, the United States doesn't need to be involved in Afghanistan. We need to be less involved in the Middle East. That during his last administration. And maybe he didn't do it exactly the way everybody wanted him to, but that he got props for that, for saying he wasn't expansionary. Granted, there were still, drone issues, and our military still got bases everywhere. Excuse me. So it was only marginal. But here's the thing. He's also saying if Hamas doesn't give back the prisoners, that he'll be hell to pay, or he'd raise hell or something in the Middle East. He's also, there was already negotiations underway with Israel.
And what is he going to do to him that isn't already being done? I mean,
well, yeah, that's where I was going to go with this. I mean, there's already a regional conflict. I mean, we've already got Israel expanding into Syria, with the government of Syria being overturned. There's also Israel expanding into Lebanon. But what I was going to say is there's already talk of will the United States arm Israel to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, or if they do the math, will they decide the United States will have to be a partner in those activities? For example, providing aerial cover, like about a year ago when a couple air carrier groups were there. So that's not bring the boys home. That's expanding, and also not just Iran, even more locally, Mexico. He talked about using U.S. force to combat gang violence in Mexico, the cartels. In the name of stopping immigration and drugs across the border, etc. So again, it sounds like there's an awful lot of force being discussed. I'm not even going to go to Canada because I just think that that's just pure hyperbole with no traction. It's the least likely of these things to actually get hot. Again, you and I talked about this in prior shows about this team building exercise that Republicans are engaged in, where they talk so forcefully about immigration problems affecting communities across the country and some of these other, culture war issues. I think this is a new lane, right? If you figure Trump's going to add his own stamp to this new term, he's getting the ball rolling by appointing some provocative personnel and staffing and putting down the gauntlet and putting down the marker on what about all these things that could be happening. So I'll give one last example. I know we're in the last 30 seconds.
Sure.
If Panama ever said they weren't going to let the U.S. military go through there, then the U.S. military would take it, right? Of course, if their prices were ever too high, the market would negotiate them down. And in fact, that's what's going to happen. The competition that comes from a new canal is going to bring down the cost and access to the Panama Canal, if it's even viable because of climate change. So if Trump will come out looking great, if everybody just does business with him and America gets good deals. So I think he's just getting the markers on the table now, just for give us something to talk about.
Which brings us to our third topic, and we've been touching on this of late, but there have been some pretty interesting developments with regard to the media, and maybe feeling that after all these 8 years of being perceived as being against Trump, they need to kind of change their tone. So you've got the Washington Post under Bezos. Well, we had talked previously about them not publishing the editorial against endorsements, and now there was an editorial cartoon that depicted Bezos and a few other people with money genuflecting to a Trump statue, and that got pulled. And the woman cartoonist herself, I'm forgetting her name at the moment, quit. She walked away, and it became a big deal. With social media, you've got the mega now, whatever it is, Facebook, saying they're not going to. What's that?
Meta.
Meta, saying they're not going to fact check anymore. And Trump bragged about it, said, I intimidated him into that decision. They're also going to reset their formulas to have more prominence to political posts, which I don't care one way or another. But that's what they're doing. There's a perception, anyways, that the media is and we talked about the Young Turks. I think that's a misinterpretation of what's going on with the Young Turks. Morning Joe, I don't know, but there've been a number of events that show that the media is just not willing to maybe take on what they took on before. Basically, if you can't beat them, join them. And that means just allowing a free for all in terms of coverage that favors Trump, because that's what readers and watchers want. Well, I think that's going to backfire, because I think that those same outfits are not going to attract mega viewers or readers. They're just going to lose them. They're just going to lose what they have. But in the meantime, the media is in trouble in general, particularly the what they're calling the legacy media, and with Bezos owning the Washington Post, you're not getting as much from New York Times. They're a public corporation, or owned by a public corporation, but rather than an oligarch. But it's it's kind of scary if we're going to see more self-censorship, more bending the knee. I don't know, maybe it's just imagination, maybe it's just a temporary thing to give Trump a chance to at least come into office. He is going to be the president. We don't want him to fail so badly that the country falls apart. But you also, that a newspaper should have no friends. That's Pulitzer, right? That's what he said. It's not the job of the media to generate what Noam Chomsky called manufactured consent. And so a lot to say on this, but if you want to add to other things that are happening in the media, that'd be great. And then let's talk about the significance of them.
Thank you for that setup, as always. I think there's a couple ways to look at this, like big picture. We came off of the public health crisis from COVID, where some unprecedented economic shocks were put in place intentionally by government. Medical shocks, media shocks, like people. There's widespread societal traumas related to not just the illness itself, but to the government response. Now that pendulum is swinging back in the direction of being critical of what many perceive to be maybe overreactions. So with that in mind, that's one way to look at it. The other way is that, in fact, the legacy media is really exhibiting behavior that is deferential, is the nice way to put it, to Trump's bull in a china shop approach to just about everything. So, for example, the LA Times, they refused to run an editorial that was critical of Trump's nominees for the various roles in the government, and that's an editorial choice. That's self-censorship, and we've seen many of the Tim Cook from Apple, Jeff Bezos from the Washington Post, and others have gone down to Mar-a-Lago to speak to Trump and offer up $1 million for the inaugural campaign. That's supporting the new president, the new administration, and the new direction. So that's, both of these, I think, are natural realities to the situation, the complexities of life. But I think that, there's something relatively, not just sort of paying, not just lip service and money, but behavioral changes towards Trump's incoming administration. We're also seeing Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, at Facebook. Like, this is a huge deal, because if you remember from the Twitter files, the U.S. government stepped in and said to the former owner of Twitter, hey, you're going to need to help us with monitoring misinformation and disinformation. And Facebook, same thing. If people were, in response to the COVID crisis, going against the grain in a way that was deemed threatening to governmental authority, Facebook had to step in. So they were coerced, basically, to step in. Mark Zuckerberg came clean today and said, this week, and said basically, well, we built complex systems around this misinformation and disinformation, including some automated filters but we went too far. And now these mistakes, we want to reduce those mistakes. We want to restore free expression, and we want to focus more on community comments instead of, in effect, what is censorship. So it's a new direction for that organization. I think this is, we're going to, in history, we're going to see this as a pretty big deal, because the complaint is, and I'll go pass it back to you in a minute, but the complaint is that when both political populations in our country, the right and the left, the blue and the red, Dems and GOP, when people are publishing information right now, we are very, very divided, and we're not agreeing on facts, and we're not deliberating, and we're not cooperating. And so the receipts in the misinformation and disinformation arguments right now have tended to show that there was a perception of a liberal bias. And so that this is according to Mark Zuckerberg himself. He's saying he doesn't want to be the guy that has that liberal bias in place. That's one thing. But he made choices like, for example, disbanding the fact checking, but moving the content review staff from California to Texas. He referred explicitly to saying, we're going to use the community comments like X. So he basically was pointing to Elon and saying, hey, Elon, I'm going to move my people closer to you. I'm going to move my practices closer to you. Well, why is this? Why? This isn't just about that. It's also because there's these like right now, Meta has billions of dollars in business with the government. They have an antitrust threat. There's an antitrust trial. So he's got, his company has corporate interests that are really need him to kiss up to the administration. So all these factors are in play. So we across the board, many entities are doing this kiss up activity that you described, or bend the knee rather, is the way you phrased it. But I think when it comes to Facebook and Meta, it's something even bigger, which is trying to maintain their privileged position due to the threat of government intervention.
I mean, again, the fact checking aspect of it, it's one thing to eliminate the post or to have it downgraded in terms of the Boolean whatever, so that not as many people say it. That you can argue that that's censorship, but to just have an automatic thing go on the bottom with the correct information, nobody should be afraid of that. I mean, if the information is incorrect, then you argue it. You're right there, right? You say, hey, look at what they put on the bottom of my post. That's BS, right? I mean, so why should they be afraid of that? And unfortunately, it's in a pandemic situation, it was dangerous. It probably killed a lot of people. A lot of Trump supporters. I mean, there are people who are making arguments that the reason the Republicans did not retake the Senate in 2022 was because too many of their people were dead because of COVID, because they didn't, they wouldn't vax and they wouldn't take other measures seriously. So it's these are real things. So you shouldn't be afraid to be challenged. You can respond to it. You can say, hey, look what's at the bottom of my post. Well, here's my information. You make up your own mind. There's nothing wrong with that. And there shouldn't be any objection to that. But as Trump said, fact checking is censorship. You have the right to not only say what you want to say, but not be contradicted. That's and that is a problem. Leave it to community comments. Well, I mean, okay, that's fine, except that if the community doesn't have the facts to be able to do it and they're not willing to dig for it, then deadly misinformation can be spread. So by caving to this, again, we'll see. I agree that they shouldn't be allowed they can do what they want. It's a private medium, but that they should not ethically do the censorship aspect of it. But to contradict it, that's just absolutely ridiculous, and it's scary because basically they're saying, yeah, people are too stupid anyway. They're not going to believe it, so we're not going to do it, and we don't want to earn this guy's problems. The interesting thing, though, is that there is this exodus of left-wing people from X slash Twitter. I always still call it Twitter because it pisses Elon off. But to Blue Sky isn't just because of Musk's politics. It's because what Musk introduced, and maybe even happened before that, is you can buy. No, it's not truly open source. You could, if you get more people liking and clicking onto your post, it should rise to the top. But what Twitter allows right now is that you can buy your way to the top rather than earn it through likes and clicks. And Blue Sky is kind of a return to the freeform market. That's why some people are moving over there for reasons independently of politics. So I'm fine with that, but I'm also fine with if something comes up that contradicts certain authorities on it, then a box with the authority position states what what the position is of the CDC or whatever, and then discuss it. What's wrong with that? It's just it boggles the mind. But I'm more concerned not as much about the social media changes as whether or not there's going to be intense media coverage. I mean, when Harris held her press rallies, they went after her press conferences. With Trump at Mar-a-Lago, I mean, it was they didn't want to be rude to him because he would kick him out. It's just that he did this through the first presidency. The people that asked him tough questions, he wouldn't call on them, right? So, and apparently that works. Nobody wants to do that. When he said back in 2018 or whatever, when he told, and I forget the name of the reporter, I'm not going to call on you anymore. Everybody should have walked out of that. Period. All of the media should have just got up and uniformly walked out. The media is not what it used to be, and unfortunately, this is scary because if this new regime represents authoritarianism, if the media isn't doing its job, anything can happen.
So, and I'm in agreement with you that it's a uncertain times. I think for me, the big takeaway is that we are in such a polarized media ecosystem that there's just immense controversy around every corner, like you said. And for Trump to, for example, during the campaign, when he was meeting with an organization of Black journalists, and he lashed out at one of the people, and he did that with, I think, Dana Bash in one of the debates, and so the vilification of the media doing its job, I think that there's a threat there. So social media organizations, and maybe maybe we'll see it in the new media too, the podcasting community, etc. They are what Mark Zuckerberg said is that he was going to focus on illegal activity. If it's illegal activity, then they're going to deplatform. Then they're going to take the algorithms, the automatic searches, the using AI to find this stuff. That they're going to focus on that, and they're going to kind of open it up for debate. So one of the things Mark Zuckerberg said was that he was told that misinformation, disinformation is a threat to democracy back in 2016, and now they're going to let it be a free for all. So I think the gauntlet's been thrown down, that now we'll see how it plays out in the coming months, because it's probably going to get what's the comment section of North Coast Journal, not North Coast Journal, Loco, the Thunderdome, the Thunderdome.
Yeah,
I think
Thunderdome.
we're going to see Thunderdome journalism in the coming weeks and months, and we'll see how resilient we are as a society.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to say about that. And with the changes at Twitter, which came under Musk, if that becomes the model, then we're going to have a problem with social media, because I complained about posts that where they were saying things like all Jews have syphilis and that spread around. I complained about that as, kind of hate speech, and it said I basically got an automatic response saying we don't find anything inappropriate. It is that, and if you feel unsafe, we suggest you block that particular poster. So
Yeah.
New world.
Yeah, brave new world indeed.
Eeny, meeny, chili beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Well, this brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
I'm going to keep it short and sweet today, and it's going to be from one of our segments. We talked earlier about Donald Trump's recent comments that had to do with Greenland and Panama and potentially other territorial expansionist visions that he might have, aspirations. I don't think any of that is remotely within the wheelhouse of what American people want or need. And I expect that there are going to be so many other things keeping us all busy that none of that is actually going to play out in any meaningful way whatsoever. And it's really just, it's a pastime that he's doing to flex his victory and get attention before he takes his inauguration in a couple weeks.
All right. I am going to predict there had been a lot of play against the Pete Hegseth's nomination. But it does appear that he has enough votes, possibly even a couple of Democratic votes in the Senate, that I predict that he is going to actually become our Secretary of Defense. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.